Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. I'm Brandon Ware. You're watching Angel65, my channel for all things music related, music posts, and music reviews. And this is Rush Deep Dive. Now, I'd like to preface this video by explaining what the impetus for it was. Rush is probably my favorite band of all time, and they are the band that has probably most influenced me as a musician. They were my gateway into progressive rock, and it is because of them that I branched out from drums. I not only tried to become a better drummer, but in high school I started playing bass and really trying to become a better vocalist so that I could pretend to be Geddy Lee. And I would spend hours a day learning Geddy Lee's bass parts and performing and trying to pretend that I was him, and I would sing for hours like him, and I was just obsessed with Rush. The obsession started in December of 2012 when I was in 8th grade. I had got some money for Christmas, so I went to Walmart and I decided to buy some music. These were the days when you could really find a decent selection of music at Walmart, and I saw a box set called Rush 5 Classic Albums, which had Moving Pictures, Fly By Night, A Farewell to Kings, 2112, and Signals in that order. At this point, I had read about Rush in Eddie Trunk's book of hard rock and heavy metal, but I really didn't know anything else about them. The only song that I had really heard, and I didn't even know it that well, was Tom Sawyer. So just on a whim, I decided to buy this and see if I liked it and if I could get into it. So I came home, and I was still, I had an unfinished room at that point. We called it the tool room. It was really just a spare bedroom. I had a mattress, an empty mattress, propped up against a treadmill, and I was leaning on that. That was my armchair for listening in those days. And on a rather crappy sound system, I put in the first CD. I just listened to the albums in the order they were presented, Moving Pictures, and my mind was blown forever. And from that moment on, I was basically obsessed. At this point, my exposure to classic rock was mainly limited to just normal hard rock. At that time, the band that I was most into was AC/DC. I was a big fan of Def Leppard and other things like that, but I had never heard of progressive rock. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know that much about these more complicated arrangements. I didn't really know what odd time signatures were. None of that. So when I heard Tom Sawyer and actually paid attention to what was going on while reading the lyrics, it blew my mind. When I saw that Neil Peart was the one writing the lyrics, it completely blew my mind. And from then on, I just became a diehard Rush fanatic. I eventually picked up all the albums, first the Mercury albums, and then the later Atlantic and Roadrunner records. I got all the live records, I got the live DVDs, and I've been steadily increasing my collection of Rush music ever since. That said, once I got to college and started going into other progressive rock, the first was Genesis, and they're probably they're nearly tied with Rush for my favorite progressive rock bands of all time. I stopped listening to Rush so much because by that point they were over. I had seen the R40 tour with my grandfather. That was the first concert I ever went to, and it is still, in my mind, one of the best shows that I have ever seen. But, Rush was over by that point, and so I kind of moved on, and they're not a band that I went to that frequently. I would pull out maybe my top 3 or 4 records every year, once or twice, but other than that, they're not a band that I spent that much time listening to. So what inspired me to go back and really explore the entire catalog in chronological order was the recent Rush 50 box set. I saw it, I thought the price was rather steep. I was definitely not going to splurge $400 on that Super Deluxe edition because I tend not to like these longer compilations and live albums on vinyl where you have to get up and flip the sides more frequently. But I decided to buy it because it had some interesting things on it that I had not heard, and it just seemed like a cool career retrospective. So I listened to it about a month ago when it came out, and it made me very, very emotional. It brought back so many memories. To hear all of the live albums and studio albums in context of their chronology was mind-blowing, and it worked all the way up to the final performance of the final show that they ever played before officially calling it quits, the encore of their final show in California before Neil retired, and eventually any hope of a reunion was, of course, shelved once he passed away. The day he passed away, I listened to the R40 concert DVD, which I had bought but not listened to because I figured, well, what's the point in watching this? Because I was there. I saw this show in Denver, and I know what it was like. But the day he died and it was announced, I watched that, and it was a deeply emotional experience, and it was an even deeper emotional experience to listen to this Rush 50 box set in chronological order and then hear that final moment of the final show. And it really reinvigorated my love of Rush and reminded me why I like them so much. Of course, the music is fantastic. The lyrics have deep meaning to me even to this day, many of them anyway. But what really sets them apart from most other classic rock and progressive rock bands is their legacy. And I maintain that Rush had probably the most successful, most artistically invigorating, and rewarding career of pretty much any rock band I can think of. That final tour, they played at the top of their capabilities, and they called it quits. Whether they wanted to or not, they went out on top, and they're one of the very, very few bands left in the classic rock and progressive rock sphere that did that, and did it with such honor and integrity, and never let their legacy slide. The final show they delivered was one of the best that they ever played, and by the time they retired, they had really completed a 40-year circle of some of the most impressive music and musical development that any band ever has exhibited. So I decided to do a Rush deep dive and go all the way back to the beginning and listen to basically everything that there is to listen to, including all the archival releases and live releases in chronological order. Because of that, I'm going to do this deep dive a little bit differently. Instead of reviewing individual products, I'm just going to go through basically all of the studio, live, and live video material in the order of its creation, its chronology, because it's spread throughout various box sets. Rush has never really done one of these career-spanning or era-specific box sets that covers an entire period of their artistic development. Rather, stuff from throughout their career, archival releases have just been spread throughout a variety of releases over the years. So we're going to talk about it in order, and in the last chapter of this video, I'll discuss what are the products that are most essential, what would I recommend. So this is chapter 1, the early years, 1974 to 1976. Really, the story starts in 1973 with the release of the first single, Not Fade Away and You Can't Fight It. The lineup is, of course, Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and John Rutsey on drums. I must admit, I had never heard this single until the Rush 50 box set. That's actually the first time I had ever listened to it because it's its first official release since the original single in 1973. And it's certainly very rough. It doesn't really give you any indication of what's to come. It's not unlike other, power rock trio kind of records from that time period. Still very early days, and it's very much got that Cream and Zeppelin inspired sound. Rush has certainly not found themselves yet, and I don't think they do find themselves on the first record either. The first record is interesting, and it does provide a glimpse of what some of their earlier blues rock influences were. It shows that John Rutsey was certainly a capable drummer and played interesting musical parts, although they certainly weren't that technically advanced, and in cases they were a bit sluggish. The songs that stand out are, of course, Working Man. I mean, that's really the song that started it all. That's the song that Donna Halper played on WMMS. The record got referred to Cliff Bernstein. They were signed to Mercury Records, and the rest, as we know it, is history. So Working Man stands out. It's not really a progressive rock song, even though it is a longer tune. It's really just a basic song with basic lyrics and a jam in the middle of it. The other songs that stand out on this record for me are Before and After, where we kind of get a glimpse of the prog rock that's to come, because really it's two separate parts. There's this softer, more serene part, and then it transitions into more of the same kind of classic rock sound that you hear on the rest of the album. Here again stands out because it's got this sort of slower blues rock groove to it, and it's another one of the long cuts on the album. What's interesting is that in the riff, the main opening section, it's kind of in 12/8, but there's the end of every bar they're playing straight eighths, and John Rutsey continues the 12/8 feel underneath that, and it kind of sounds misplaced. What makes that interesting is that after the first Rush album, which in general is certainly not a classic record, and I think it's one that you can quite comfortably skip if you're new to the Rush catalog, we have the Laura Secord Secondary School video and ABC 1974. So on the R40 box set was the first official release of the full Laura Secord Secondary School video, which is the only officially released video with John Rutsey on drums. And it's very rough, still very early days. The high school crowd kind of doesn't seem to know what to expect that they're playing to. And you can see that John Rutsey is the MC of the band. To me, it's very clear that Alex and Geddy were going places, and that his style, very Simon Kirke, as Alex Lifeson has said, just really does not fit the vibe that they're going for, even though he plays perfectly fine. What makes the Laura Secord Secondary School video interesting is to compare it to ABC 1974. So John Rutsey has sugar diabetes. That's the reason their former manager Vic Wilson claimed he was fired in the Beyond the Lighted Stage documentary. The band themselves has stated that there were musical differences, that they tried to do some of these more ambitious prog rock inspired arrangements and he was not comfortable with it. Either way, he is let go, and they need a drummer. So they find this weird-looking guy called, what's his name? Neil Peart? I don't suppose he's any good, right? All joking aside, on this Agora Ballroom Cleveland recording from 1974, you can hear just how much power Neil Peart brings to the writing, the performing, before he's even contributed to the writing, and just how much their sound developed even in the few months between the first record and this Cleveland performance. It's clear right off the bat that he is an extremely accomplished drummer and is by far the most accomplished musician in the band, probably had the most experience, the most professional experience up to that point. So Rush picks him, they go on the road with him, and eventually they convince him to write lyrics. On this Agora Ballroom show, you can hear when they do Here Again, when Alex and Geddy are doing the straight eighths, Neil is playing the straight eighths with them. He's just more comfortable with these more complicated arrangements. He's doing his drum solos. He's playing just more ambitious parts, even on relatively simple numbers, like In the Mood. And he's just bringing a lot of fire and power to the band. And it's clear that this is the definitive lineup. So the first album is very much worth skipping, because the story really gets interesting with the second album, Fly By Night. Interestingly enough, the second album I heard by Rush, after I heard Moving Pictures, then played Fly By Night next. It's safe to say I was very astonished by how different Geddy's voice was on the two recordings. He's still very much in his early days, his kind of screeching, shouting style, but doing it with these more complicated and poetic, I guess, lyrics. But right from that opening moment of Anthem, it's clear this is a band that is stepping definitively into progressive rock territory with these odd time signatures and complicated arrangements. So Fly By Night is one that still is a favorite of mine. I go back to it somewhat frequently, and it's got a lot of my favorite moments on it. So the opening track, Anthem, has always been a massive favorite of mine. Best I Can is a leftover from the John Rutsey period. In fact, you can see them play it with John Rutsey at the Laura Secord performance. Not a favorite. Beneath, Between, and Behind is the first song that Neil wrote lyrics for, and it's clear they're moving into metal territory here, where there's a lot of words jammed into a very short and tight arrangement, arguably too many. But then we get one of the real standouts of the album, which is their first proper progressive rock outing, Bytor and the Snow Dog. This is the first time that I had heard anything like that, using a song to tell a story in this way, and it was mind-blowing. I mean, the middle section with the 7/4, and then into the quieter Aftermath section, leading into the Hymn of Triumph with just this phenomenal Alex Lifeson guitar solo, is still mind-blowing to me, that a band this young was undertaking ambitious arrangements like this. I get really upset when people criticize Rush saying that they were not original, because while I can admit that, particularly on that first album and in pockets on Fly By Night, they're still very much in the style of Cream and Zeppelin and are doing their blues-based hard rock thing, what I think Rush's great innovation was inventing prog metal. because although their arrangements were not as harmonically ambitious as Genesis, or as rhythmically ambitious as Yes, or as instrumentally ambitious as maybe, I don't know, Jethro Tull, these other prog rock classics, the thing is, those other bands were not heavy. They did their thing, they did hard rock, they had their more aggressive moments, but they were not heavy. Rush was heavy. Rush was very much a heavy metal band, even though in 1975 the term heavy metal was still fairly new and not that common. But they were a heavy metal band playing these more complicated arrangements. I mean, bands that would later do these ambitious, complex, progressive arrangements like Metallica and certainly Dream Theater. I mean, these bands would not exist if not for the influence of Rush. And so Fly By Night, particularly By Tor and the Snow Dog, is where you hear that for the first time. Side 2 of the record, we get the title track, which is one of their classic songs. There's promo videos for Anthem and Fly By Night where they're miming to them rather poorly, but it's just fascinating to see Neil Young beating the crap out of the drums, so clearly passionate about his capabilities for playing. And the lyrics are about his trip to England long before he joined Rush and the disillusionment he felt. We have Making Memories, which is very much a road anthem, just about life on tour. And then we get probably my two favorite tracks on the album, which are Rivendell, this soft acoustic number, which really showcases that Geddy was a good singer, even from the very beginning, and that he did have a soft and more measured quality to his voice than his critics gave him credit for. The lyrics, at the time I heard this, I had no idea it was about Lord of the Rings. I hadn't seen or got into Tolkien at that point yet, so I did not know what that song was about. I just thought it was really pretty. And then we get, interestingly, my favorite song on the record, which is In the End. And this is, again, kind of a leftover of the Lee Lifeson Rutsey period. Geddy Lee has penned the lyrics for this one. This is one of two songs that Neil did not write the lyrics for on this album. But I love it because it's got, it's just such a melodic piece of music. It's heavy, but it's got these beautiful melodies in the bass line, and one of my all-time favorite Alex Lifeson solos. It's still kind of in that style of Jimmy Page, but when he gets to that uplifting major key moment right before it transitions back to the bridge of the song, it gives me goosebumps every time to this day. I think it's one of his best solos. And this is really the first inkling you get of Alex Lifeson to come, where he's experimenting with these odd phrases that, coming from almost any other player, would sound wrong, and interspersing it with these more, not predictable, but palatable scalar moments. And it's just, I think it's brilliant. It's beautifully constructed. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and it's a phenomenal finish to the record. There is a 5.1 mix of Fly By Night that was first released on DVD in the Sectors box set and then later released as a standalone Blu-ray audio. Rush in 5.1 tends to not be that invigorating. Most of the mixes, except one, are done by Richard Chickey, and in many of the cases he's using mostly the front speakers and the back is providing kind of a bit of ambience. That's more true in some cases than others. But this album, I wouldn't say the 5.1 mix is particularly necessary or exciting because it's a very dry album. I mean, most of their early records are. They get more ambitious once we get to A Farewell to Kings, starting in Chapter 2. But the arrangements are pretty simplistic. While they're playing busy parts, really there's only 3 parts and double-track guitar, sometimes double-tracked vocals, and that's about it. There's really not much in the way of overdubs and these more ambitious things. Rush has maintained that they kept their arrangements simple so that they could accurately reproduce them live, except for maybe a few cases here and there, and that's true pretty much up until the Signals album. It's not until Grace Under Pressure that they really start getting more ambitious with their in-studio arrangements and doing things that they couldn't quite reproduce live, or if they were reproducing it live, they were doing it using samples because they're of MIDI and being able to experiment more. But that's not really present on any of the Terry Brown records. All of the Terry Brown records are very, very dry, very in your face, and honestly, most of them sound better in stereo. The 5-point mixes just kind of give you more ambience, but they don't really add anything in terms of detail, because pretty much all the detail that can be heard is heard in the stereo mix. So I would not say that the 5.1 mix of that album is essential. Moving on to the latter half of 1975, Rush is getting even more ambitious, and we have Caress of Steel, which is one of the divisive records in their catalog. I mean, I know a lot of the diehard fans really love it, but the story behind this is that while they were getting more and more ambitious with their musical arrangements and storytelling, the record was not received well, and it was very much a case of whether to drop the band or not, which resulted in the fourth album, which we'll get to soon. I really like Caress of Steel. This is one of the ones I got to early, and I think it's a very cool record. At this point, I hadn't heard any other progressive rock. The only other sidelong epic I had heard at this point was 2112, so I thought Fountain of Lamneth was really cool. I thought the story was really satisfying and that the music to support it works really well. The Necromancer I don't like as much, because even though it's more cohesive as a piece than the Fountain of Lamneth, I think the spoken word segments kind of make it corny. I don't think it is as musical as some of their other stuff, even though there are some really cool instrumental moments, particularly the second section, Under the Shadow. The three opening tracks are the shorter songs, so we get Bastille Day, which is of course a classic and remained in their set list for quite a number of years. I Think I'm Going Bald, which is kind of one of the earlier songs where we hear Rush express their sense of humor, which I like, because they're a band that at the time was accused of taking themselves too seriously. Geddy said in an interview with David Frick that band doesn't take themselves that seriously, and that's very clear in their later days where you see their humorous tour films, but they do take their music seriously. But I Think I'm Going Bald is just a bit of a comedy number, if you will. And plenty of other progressive rock bands were doing that at the time. Genesis had their comedy moments, ELP had their comedy moments. Thick as a Brick, Jethro Tull, the entire record is kind of a comedic satire, etc., etc. Not a standout track by any means, though. The one that I really like on the album is Lakeside Park, because it's a song that resonates deeply for me. There's an amusement park in Denver called Lakeside Park, which is one of the oldest amusement parks in the country, and those lyrics really just resonate with me because it's just about growing older and the magic of youth kind of disappearing year by year. And on one hand, you're nostalgic and you miss those days, you reminisce, and on the other hand, it's just a part of how life works, and you get used to that, and it's just the way things are. And Rush's catalog is very much like that for me. It reminds me of youth and just the sense of adventure that you had when you were younger. So that song, the lyrics are very simple, but they hold up. Okay, so Caress of Steel doesn't do well. They're playing small venues, they're doing what they call the Down the Tubes tour. It's a question of whether they'll make another record or not. They get very angry about this idea that they have to compromise their sound and be more commercial. So rather than do that, they put out the most complicated of the albums they've done thus far, and it is still one of the most revered classic rock, prog rock albums of all time, 2112. When I heard this, it blew my mind. I had never heard a song that was 20 minutes before. I didn't even know anybody had ever done that. I didn't realize there was an entire culture and history of bands doing that before Rush, because Rush was really my gateway into progressive rock, and what a perfect gateway they were. In the Classic Albums documentary about 2112 and Moving Pictures, Taylor Hawkins from the Foo Fighters, rest in peace, says, if you liked Yes and Genesis for their complexity, but you liked Black Sabbath and Zeppelin for their power, then Rush was the perfect band for you. And I could not agree more. Having not heard the progressive rock bands, Yes, Genesis, etc., but being very well versed in classic and heavy metal at that time, Rush was just a perfect gateway for me. And 2112 at the time was probably my favorite record because it was the heaviest, it was the most brutal, abrasive, in your face of all their records, and it still feels that way when I listen to it. The story itself, I do think it is pretty satisfying. You know, it's not the most moving story, and the ending, as ambiguous as it is, with the intonation of attention all planets of the Solar Federation, etc., etc., you know, you could argue it's a bit dated, it's a bit corny, it's a bit behind its time, even then. But I just thought it was so powerful and so mind-blowing. And I do think it is a very moving idea that music can change a society and get it to recognize its lost roots and return to maybe a more rewarding way of life where people are allowed to express themselves freely, which is exactly the message the record intended to send. I think it works, and I still think particularly the opening 7 minutes overture and the Temple of Syrinx, which they played in pretty much every live show until the final one, is some of their most aggressive music ever. The overture is just phenomenal prog. I mean, really, it's a masterclass in prog metal. And the Temples of Syrinx, man, I had never heard anybody sing like that before. Even being a fan of Zeppelin and AC/DC, where these singers would sing in this higher register with a lot of power, I had never heard anyone just shout like that the way Geddy Lee does so abrasively on the Temples of Syrinx, and I still think it's fantastic. The second side is good fun too. A Passage to Bangkok is amazing, and it has this one is up there, man. It's definitely top 3 in terms of Lifeson guitar solos. His solo on A Passage to Bangkok is just incredible. Still one of my favorite guitar solos of all time. The Twilight Zone I really liked. It's kind of because of that song that I actually got into the show, The Twilight Zone, and ended up watching every episode eventually, though not many, many years after I had heard the song, though. And it was fun to see the episodes that the song was specifically talking about. Excuse me. Take his hat off, he's got 3 eyes, or wake up lost in an empty town, you've just become his brand new toy. Those kinds of things. When I saw the episodes that the song was specifically describing, I was like, huh, how about that? The way he managed to work these narratives into these short 4-line verses, and then you have this more mystical chorus. It's not one I go back to anymore, but at the time I had never heard anything like it, and so it's still, I just revere that record so much because of the variety on it. The second side is so different from the first side. We get Lessons, which is solely composed by Lifeson, kind of I guess just a rebellious rant against parents, like, hey, I know what I'm doing here. You know, classic young rebel stuff. We get Tears, which is another one of my favorites on the record. I think it's really one of only a few examples of Rush doing a ballad and it being very convincing. And then we get Something for Nothing, which is another favorite of mine, and such a powerful, heavy rock number to close the album. Frick says it's like the Suite in miniature in terms of its lyrical content, which it very much is. It's about getting up and going and working for what you want and not resting on your laurels, just accepting life as it comes to you. And it's a great final song on the record. So 2112 is really their first proper classic album, and it stands the test of time. I mean, it's still a thoroughly satisfying record, and it is one of the great prog rock albums of all time. I do not like it as much as I used to. I think where they go in the next chapter, which I'm going to call the classic years, even though 2112 very much is a classic album in its own right, I just like where they start to experiment more. But every time I go back to 2112, I'm amazed how much I enjoy it. Related to 2112, we have a 5.1 mix of this album as well, released on the deluxe edition with a comic book detailing the story, which is pretty interesting. This is actually the album that got me into surround sound music. It's the first album I had ever bought that had a dedicated surround sound mix, and it inspired me to buy a surround sound system. So I cherish it for that reason, but going back to it again for the first time in many, many years and listening to it on my now pretty high quality surround sound system, I'm amazed by how unamazing it is. It's probably the worst of their 5.1 mixes that Richard Chicky has done. It just sounds very hollow and just basically stereo with some echo in the back channels. It really doesn't add anything to the record. So while it's fun to hear the music with the comic book visuals on screen, I certainly don't think that 5.1 mix is outstanding, and it's not one I go back to. Some of the songs on the second side actually make better use of the surround field than the epic prog story piece does, which seems counterintuitive, right? But Lessons and Tears and the Twilight Zone were all pretty impressive in surround sound, but still, I mean, we're nothing like James Guthrie's Pink Floyd mixes or Steven Wilson's mixes of prog rock music. It doesn't do that much for me. So that one is very much skippable. We had the 40th anniversary release of 2112, which is really the start of Rush doing these rather lackluster and undercooked box sets. I would say the Rush 40th anniversary sets have by and large been too expensive and haven't contained enough interesting material in them. This is certainly no exception to that, so we get some covers of the songs, and the covers, while interesting, are just a strange inclusion, but I did enjoy them. So we get A Passage to Bangkok by Billy Talent, which is just kind of a more rocked up version of it. Not particularly impressive. Steven Wilson's version of The Twilight Zone I really enjoyed. What else is there? There's Dave Grohl, Taylor Hawkins, and Nick Raskulinecz doing their version of Overture, basically a recorded version of what they did at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when they inducted Rush, although this is certainly a more aggressive arrangement, and they kind of metal it up in some places, which I really like. We get Jacob Moon doing Something for Nothing, and he really takes the metal out of the song and makes it more laid back, and I think it actually works really well. I certainly don't prefer it to Rush's version, but it works as an alternate arrangement of the song. It's probably the most drastically different of all the covers from Rush's version. But my favorite of the covers is Tears by Alice in Chains, because Alice in Chains is another one of my all-time favorite bands. I am a huge Alice in Chains fan. New, old, William Duvall, Lane Staley, whatever. I think it's all great. I've loved pretty much everything Alice in Chains has ever put out. And I just think the song suits them so well. It was just such a perfect choice of the band to do that cover. In fact, it's the one cover I think is better than Rush's version because it suits Alice in Chains' style so well. And had I never heard of Rush and had heard this first, you could easily fool me into thinking it is an Alice in Chains song. I would love to see Alice in Chains do that live. I bet they would absolutely crush it live. Great cover. I think they do a great job with it. And Hugh Syme plays keyboards on the cover, just as he did on the original Rush version, playing the Mellotron. This is the first time I had ever... I guess I had heard the Mellotron before. I had heard it on the Beatles, but I didn't know what it was that I was hearing at that time. This is the first time I had ever seen it in the credits. Mellotron. I'm like, what? What is a Mellotron? I had never heard of it. It's the prog keyboard instrument, I would later come to learn. In addition to those covers, you get two basically live outtakes from All the World's a Stage, which we'll get to, neither of which is a buying point. You get a live bootleg version of The Twilight Zone, one of only 2 times it was ever known to have been performed live. And it's a very poor quality recording, and I'm not convinced it actually works that well live. So again, not a buying point. We get a DVD. On the DVD in the 40th anniversary edition, you get the Passaic, New Jersey bootleg video, which was first released in complete form on the R40 box set, and then it's just repeated here. And this is great. I like that that's included. I do enjoy the Passaic bootleg. You get to see Rush in their very early days, just rocking out and doing most of 2112 live, still with this very basic trio arrangement. And it's just amazing how powerful they were in those days, even in the early days before they started incorporating more sounds and more percussion. Even as just a classic 3-piece trio, they really did pack a punch live. And you get to see that in the Passaic bootleg. So that's definitely worth watching on YouTube if you don't end up buying it on R40 or the 40th anniversary edition. And then we get some bonus videos, including a fun Q&A with Alex Lifeson and Terry Brown, which is good fun. The problem with these Rush interviews and stuff that are spaced all throughout the box sets, and there's plenty of them on YouTube as well, is interviewers tend to ask a lot of the same questions, and the answers don't change very much from interview to interview. But there are a few interesting questions in there, and it's funny, which I like hearing. You get a video of Dave Grohl, Taylor Hawkins, and Nick Raskulinecz doing their cover of 2112 Overture, which is, again, good fun. And then you get behind the scenes with Billy Talent, which I wasn't interested in. I don't know anything about Billy Talent. The only recording I've ever heard by that band is their version of A Passage to Bangkok, which, again, cool, but certainly doesn't top Rush's version, not even close. And then to close out this chapter, we have the first official Rush live album, which is All the World's a Stage. In that Eddie Trunk Essential Hard Rock and Heavy Metal book, when he talked about it, he said he liked it the most of any of their live albums because it's rough and raw, and that's what he enjoys. It's just showing the band still in their very early period, rocking out and doing these extended numbers, but with these relatively simple three-piece arrangements. Not that the music that they're playing is simple. I mean, it's busy as all hell, but they're just they haven't expanded into this more progressive territory where they're incorporating more sound and kind of varying the arrangements a little bit more. You know, they're just not there yet. And I agree with him. I do like it for that reason. Getty in his book My Effin' Life said that they really didn't do much to this album to correct it or fix it, so it is very raw. It's very honest album, and it shows just what the band sounded like at that time. And so it's definitely worth checking out for that reason, just to hear the band in their earliest stage. At this point, they've moved past the blues rock thing, and their arrangements have gotten a little more complicated. Their music is more ambitious and more progressive, but there's still a very innocent, and maybe naive's not the right word, just innocent, young quality to it, which makes it fun to hear the band in their earliest live incarnations doing already very complicated music and just trying to pull it off with vigor and with accuracy. It's cool. Definitely worth a listen. So that's going to wrap us up for the early years. At this point, Rush, in the liner notes of All the World's a Stage, said, "We consider this album a close to Chapter 1 of Rush," and I very much see it that way. After this album, we start recording in England. We start incorporating synthesizers. We start making the stories more ambitious, the arrangements more ambitious, the instrumentals get more and more complicated. We're bringing in more influences, including jazz fusion, particularly on La Via Strangiato, things like that. And so, while I still enjoy 2112 and consider it an essential record, it's obviously the record from this period that you should check out first. Really, I'm more interested in where they go after this, and they really start to expand and turn into one of the great rock bands of all time. As we get into future chapters, you know, I'll be honest, there are things that I will say that are, I'll be honest about what I like and what I don't like, what speaks to me and what doesn't, but I will also defend the band pretty much at every turn. They're a band that I am constantly willing to defend. I am part of the Rush Army. Not that they need to be defended, because as, you know, Billy Corgan stated in the All the World's a Stage documentary, most of the people in the hard rock community, particularly from 2010 onwards, realize that not only does Rush kick ass, and always did kick ass, but that they ought to be considered one of the greatest bands of all time. They really do. I mean, their influence on musicians for generations, including me, is still being felt to this day. And the fact that they are not listed among the great prog rock bands in some people's eyes is, to me, not just wrong, but ignorant. Even if you don't like Rush music, you have to respect their accomplishments over a 40-year career. And I'm excited to talk about the rest of them. But from this period, I mean, what are the things that you must check out? 2112, All the World's a Stage, comes highly recommended, but 2112 for sure. And the other album, probably Fly By Night. Past that, you know, it's good to look at these videos, the Passaic Bootleg, the Laura Secord video, and Caress of Steel is also worth a listen. The only things that I would say are you can easily skip and not feel like you've missed anything are the first album and the 2112 covers and stuff. You know, they're fun to listen to if you want to go there, but certainly not essential. Alright, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Which is your favorite album or video or live performance from this period? What is your opinion on this period in Rush's history? And do you agree with my thoughts? Do you disagree? Let me know. I am excited to hear. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. Bye.